I walk past Centro Minneteca, this nice food restaurant, really. I can't help but think what was here in my earliest days here. It was a real dive bar before they coined the term, right? It was Murphy's, an Irish bar, and it was a hangout for a lot of the actors that live down here still, a lot of them do. One that lived here, who was a star of the late 30s, 1940s, 50s, really up to the 70s, was a guy, I don't know if he's known in Scotland, and I don't know if anybody in America remembers him, John Carradine.
Oh, yeah.
John Carradine.
Kung Fu's dad?
He's dead. The Kung Fu man's dead, right. Keith Carradine, David Carradine, John. They lived a couple of blocks away, and in the 1950s, John Carradine made this movie called I Shot Billy the Kid, okay? John Carradine came back from Hollywood. The film was released. It was doing well. People were going to it. And he dropped into Murphy's for a beer like he usually did. Ozzie, who was the bartender on duty this particular night, told me the story. Carradine's sitting there, and he notices a drunk about 4 bar stools away, looking very, very intently at him. And now Carradine's an actor, so he doesn't, he's used to being stared at, so he ignores the drunk. He doesn't see the drunk get off the stool, walk up behind John Carradine, tap him on the shoulder, and when Carradine turned around, the drunk called off and pow! Hit him right in the face, right to the floor. John Carradine was decked, right? Nobody knew what to do. Everybody froze. Carradine got up, he looked at the drunk and he said, "What the hell did you do that for?" And the drunk looked at him and he said, "You shot Billy the Kid." True story. And it happened here when this was Murphy's. By the way, you can tell this was an old saloon at one point by the side door. Right. No, actually it was for going in. The front door was for normal customers. The side door, which was on the side street, right, was for the cop, the local cop on the beat who wanted to duck in and nobody would see him, get a couple of beers, and out he went, right? It helps to be kind to the police, believe me, right? There you go. Let's go this way. Right next door, these were A.T. Stewart's stables. Recognize the name A.T. Stewart? A.T. Stewart was the guy who invented the department store. Everybody thinks it was R.H. Macy, but actually A.T. Stewart beat him by about 10 years or so. When they demolished the stables, they put up this wonderful building. In 1812, it was a cardboard box factory, and then in World War I, it was a munitions factory. It became manufacturing. It was always manufacturing up until fairly recently. Comes Prohibition, and we're all familiar with Prohibition, right? Yeah, I bet we are. Right? The great experiment that fails, I know. It's hard to believe that every once in a while the United States makes a great mistake. Isn't it? I know. I can't think of any recent ones. This one was in 1920, and this was a beaut because, of course, they couldn't tell you not to drink anything, but they could tell you that you couldn't still manufacture, bottle, offer, sale, or purchase any alcoholic beverage. This was a huge fad. People made their own stuff. Bathtub gin, remember that? Or you don't remember it, but you've heard it, right? We weren't moonshiners up here. We didn't know anything about shine up here. By the way, if anybody wants their mail, here's some. No, this is a wonderful magazine you can get on the way out. People were making alcohol with wood alcohol, grain alcohol, witch hazel as the base alcohol. It was terrible. They called it bathtub gin. They were offering it for sale. And people who were making alcoholic beverages in their bathtub reported that stuff was so rough that it would eat the enamel right off the bathtub. And people were drinking. I know. You wanted to go to a hidden restaurant, someplace where you were relatively assured of getting the good stuff. And of course, the hidden restaurant, nobody's supposed to know about it, called a speakeasy, right? And why was it called a speakeasy?
Yeah, the password.
Well, not just the password, but really that was the answer to the question this gentleman would ask me, which is, where can I get a drink around here? Right? He would ask me, wouldn't he?
Sure.
I'd ask you. Why not, right? And my answer to you would be, speakeasy. Quiet. I'll tell you, nobody's supposed to know about this. Nobody's supposed to know about speakeasies, although there were 30,000 speakeasies in New York City alone during Prohibition, right? And this was one of the greatest. Right where we're standing was a shoe repair shop. It was a shoe shop during Prohibition. And what would happen is, you'd come in the front door there, and there'd be an old guy at the shoemaker's glass with the nails in his mouth. He'd say, "Pardon me, sir, I'd like to buy a pair of shoes." And he would look at you, and if you gave him the right size and the right color shoe, he'd nod at you, and he'd motion you back. You'd walk right down this aisle, open a little door, and there would be Patty Ryan's Speakeasy right behind him. And that was it. This is a great restaurant after Prohibition, too, the Blue Mill Tavern. where a lot of movie stars and theatrical stars came because of its proximity to the Cherry Lane Theater, which we'll talk about in a bit. Blue Mill was wonderful. Grange Hall that followed the Blue Mill, then another incarnation of the Blue Mill, and finally, really good restaurant here, 50 Commerce, that's run by Harold Moore and Joe Zazula, two guys who met while they were working for Jean-Georges von Gretchen, one of the great chefs and restaurateurs in New York City. Vong, this is Montfrechette, was his. The Mercer Kitchens, the Mercer Hotel was his. What you get here is really Nouvelle American cuisine. Really good steak, really good chicken. The dinner now, they're offering a whole line of dinners for two, which is the trend in New York City restaurants. You come in and you order like chicken for two, which is terrific. For the vegetarians among us, there's a wonderful vegetable fricassee that is made with truffle oil. And the bread basket. Nobody ever points out the bread basket because bread, you just get good bread. This bread basket has authentic New York-style pretzels. They're not hard like the ones you get at the street vendors. They're soft pretzels, they're warm, kind of doughy, and a nice light dusting of salt on top. It really is quite wonderful. And the decor echoes that wonderful past as well. These are the original sconces from the Blue Mill. This, unfortunately, the front bar itself is from the Blue Mill. The back bar is made by the Brunswick Corporation. You may know them if you bowl, right? Brunswick are the pin setter people. They also make furniture. In the 1920s, they were one of the major record labels in the United States. Did you know that? Brunswick, every Al Jolson, Eddie Cantor, all recorded for Brunswick. So the decor really does reinforce that sense of ease and graciousness, which is another thing Greenwich Village was known for. Now about the mythology. What about these houses over here? The myth behind those houses, and you will hear this story from everybody in the neighborhood, every tour guide will tell you, these two houses, identical houses, were built by an old ship's captain, and he built them for his daughters. Because when he passed on, he wanted to make sure his daughters were comfortable and that they would live together as a family in peace and harmony, two identical houses separated only by a little garden. But, according to the story, like most parents, the ship's captain was clueless, and he didn't realize the daughters hated each other. They couldn't stand each other. So the irony of the story is, two women who couldn't stand each other were condemned to live right side by side, separated by just a little garden. Now that's a great story, isn't it? Sadly enough, not true.
Not true.
No, the guy who built these, he built them as rental properties in the 1850s. That was a big thing down here, to live in New Jersey and to build rental properties here. He was a simple milkman. And he built them identically so he could immediately tell when he showed up if there was anything wrong, just by comparison. So one roof was a little, off. He knew there were repairs that had to be made. Now, you know the old saying, if the facts conflict with the legends, print the legends, right? And that, in a sense, was Greenwich Village's strength. People would hear all kinds of things happening here, and that's what would bring them in. This was the place where you could reinvent yourself. This was the place where what you were didn't matter. It's what you did now. This was the place where the minister's daughter would come and sow her wild oats before she went home to marry the dentist, right? This is where the sons and daughters of wealthy people would be warehoused. It's cheap rent, and if the kid was an embarrassment, then simple mom and dad would pay for the rent, give him his entire monthly expenses on the condition that he never returned home. And actually, one of the people that happened to was the son of a very renowned general of World War II. You'd recognize his name. He's still famous to this day. People thought of him as presidential timber. He might have been a presidential contender. He and his wife had a son who had a hobby that they didn't really like. The son used to like to dress up like Joan Crawford and visit the bars in Greenwich Village. I know, that embarrassed the general, so they paid all his life to stay down here away from the family. It's very hard to imagine the general being embarrassed today about that, right? I mean, I didn't know the kid, but I heard he was a very nice guy. And he never got into a fight with Betty Davis. Betty Davis was the guy over on Grove Street. That is, right? Now, this is what Greenwich Village was known for. People would hear that poets were here, poetry or pizza, and they would come down, and that's what they would do. And by doing it, that's what they made Greenwich Village. If you heard poetry was here, and enough poets came down, it became a center of poetry. And that's exactly how it worked. The mythology also fueled the art for which Greenwich Village is known. And a good example is right here. This little wonderful mural up here. This is a representation of the mythology of those houses. The two sisters on either side, and this is the artist's vision of the dream of the old sea captain who wanted his daughters living in peace and harmony, that centerpiece, which you can actually purchase, believe it or not, a copy of this over the internet. I think the website is drdavinci.com. You can actually see a part of it. It's cool, huh?